Okay, welcome everyone to TNT Live. Thank you to everyone joining us, and thank you to Jim Karahalios for coming on. So, those of you who don't know Jim, those in Ontario probably know him as the man who started the New Blue Party. Federally, he was a leadership candidate for the Conservative Party before he did the great sin of criticizing Erin O'Toole, which is a no-no. But Jim is a trained lawyer and engineer, and used the lawyering side to represent Benjamin Dichter. You also represent Chris Guerra, who is a Adopt a Trucker. So you were part of the Emergencies Act Inquiry, and I would say those 2 days were probably the spiciest 2 days, where you have essentially two conflicting narratives from the, let's say, pro convoy side. You have the standard everyone who falls under the JCCF umbrella. But then there's actually a bunch of people who have presented differing evidence, including your two clients, Ben Dichter and Chris Guerra, as well as Chad Eros, who submitted his own witness testimony to the commission, which seems to back up what Benjamin Dichter said. So I'll leave it to you, because you started a political party, you had your own stuff, and then you decided to get involved on the legal side with Benjamin Dichter. So tell us how that came about, and what made you say, yeah, I'm gonna do this for the truckers.
So I always worked as a lawyer, and a lot of the political advocacy stuff I did was part-time. I had a full-time job as a lawyer. My Belinda forgave me, my wife, when she met me, and I told her I was a lawyer. She said, I'll forgive you, and she still married me. So on every campaign stop, I ask our supporters to forgive me for being a lawyer. I think more like an engineer, though. I'm not a licensed engineer, but I did an undergrad and master's in engineering. Way too much school. That's obvious. Encouraging anyone that younger than me not to spend so much time in school. But you guys remember I was sick in 2021. So shortly after we announced the New Blue Party. So I only had time to work on the New Blue Party from being sick and in the hospital bed. Anytime I had was doing that. And near the end of 2021 or beginning of 2022, I started taking on clients again. And I've got a few clients that are tied up in what we would say COVID mandate related stuff on the criminal side, and with Ben and Chris Guerra on the civil litigation side. They were without representation in the summer. They were previously represented by the team that's representing the other defendants in the matter, including Tamara Leach. And for reasons that I can't really get into, they were without representation, and they called me. And me and a couple other lawyers have been representing them since the summer. And as part of that, you said I participated in the inquiry, but actually not to the extent that my clients wanted to. They wanted to have standing at the inquiry. And Ben wasn't included in the standing application from the convoy team. I don't think you should call it the JCCF team, because it's not really. They have their own standing, the JCCF at the inquiry, with the Democracy Fund joint. And then there's a party made up of a few individuals and the corporation, what we'd call like the Freedom Corporation, that was created during the protest. And they applied for standing in June, and Chris was included in that group, but Ben was not. And Ben, to his surprise, didn't realize he wasn't included in the group until sometime in the middle of the summer after the deadline. And it was a shock to him, because him and Chad and Chris Guerra, along with Tamara and Chris Barber, and I think the other two are Miranda, and if I'm not mistaken, Sean. They're the original 7 directors of that Freedom Corporation. And so 3 or 4 of them were named in the application for standing at the inquiry, but Ben was not one of them that was included. So together with Chris, we made an application to get standing, but because we were like 2 months late, we didn't get standing. So some of the viewers might be, well, what's standing? Like, what's Jim talking about? So usually you think of like a civil litigation case. You have a plaintiff and a defendant, 2 parties, and they have standing. Some court proceedings have more than 2 parties if you get into cross claims. At an inquiry or at a commission, there's the commissioner who kind of acts like the judge, and they're on a fact-finding mission. They're not there to set blame in terms of criminal liability or civil liability. but there was an opportunity for all these groups to get standing. So former Chief Slowly has standing. The government of Canada has standing. The Conservative Party of Canada applied for standing back in June. They were rejected, for example. The Ontario government, led by Doug Ford, could have applied to get standing, and they did not. But the governments of Saskatchewan and Alberta, I believe, applied, and they have standing. And so most of the groups that have standing, if I can say it that way, at the inquiry, are on the side of, the protest was no good, broadly speaking, or at least on the side of, not on the side of the protesters, I guess. That's the way we could probably say.
Let me sort of delegalize it, and as someone who's, I guess, isn't tied up in legal liability, this is my layman's thing from just watching it, and this is watching Keith Wilson's testimony and being around Keith Wilson during the entire Freedom Convoy. Is I'm watching it and I'm saying, why is he giving away the government narrative? Like, why is he said things that he just didn't need to say, that weren't, in my opinion, weren't true. Like he said, fringe elements started to take over the convoy. No, they didn't. Right. And like, I'm just saying as a layman, like, there's a way to answer this truthfully under oath. Like, and like, if you're, what you want to kind of say is, when a movement gets hundreds of thousands of people showing up, are 3 of those people just statistically going to be fundamentally insane, ranting about George Soros, microchipping, dogs? Yes. And they're crazy, but that's just a faction of lots of people. They weren't inside the actual Freedom Convoy leadership, right? That was not fringe group. You didn't need to say that, but yeah, Keith Wilson gave away that narrative. So he went into that. And then he also basically gave up that we weren't sure when it transitioned to an illegal protest. So Keith Wilson's now saying it's illegal, where Keith Wilson was the one telling all of us during the convoy that he went to court. And I remember talking to Keith Wilson there, he's saying, we won the decision. The judge ruled it was illegal. Side note, this is behind the scenes. I looked at the thing, Ben says he sent it to his friend to look at it. And I'm like looking non-lawyer. I'm like, okay, I read through it. I'm like, I don't really see where it says we won, but I don't have a legal brain. So I kept trying to get to Keith or Ava or anyone in the JCF. I'm like, guys, I'll write the article. Just have a lawyer show me the part where you win, and I'll write something on that.
Well, you're talking about during the protest, the injunction that was made, and
this was part of that.
Judge said it was a legal protest, but in Keith's defense, right? You could be asked a question as a witness as to whether or not you thought what was going on with a convoy, and as one witness in a scene of tens of thousands of people, maybe his impression was that there were small groups that were trying to take over the leadership of the convoy. So I don't know, like that's not a fact question, right? You can't really dispute whether that's right or wrong because it's based on the individual's interpretation. But what's interesting is you kind of assumed in that question some things. And what's interesting about Keith Wilson's testimony was he wasn't one of the original 7 directors of that Freedom Corporation that has standing. He was, I guess he's said in public that he was the lawyer of either the corporation or the convoy or the protest as a whole. Not really sure. But then he was a witness. So he moved from lawyer to witness, which was interesting. Ben Dichter got summoned to go testify last week. And he's not a party of standing, but when you get summoned for the period of time you're testifying, you now have standing. And he retained me to go and help him out as his lawyer with the ability to ask him questions. So that's how.
And we might want to expand out on that of just how weird it is that Ben is in a situation, and Chris Guerra, who didn't get to testify at all, that they're in a position where they're not even going to be able to speak or have anyone cross-examine other witnesses on their behalf, despite Chris Guerra running Adopt a Trucker, which was essentially the movement, the organization, the sub-organization that was dealing with truckers, finding them housing while they were in Ottawa, because not everyone could live inside their truck around Parliament. And then Benjamin Dichter, who was literally named as the main spokesperson, along with Tamara Leach, and they're just kind of viewed as side characters now, while you have people like, Keith Wilson and Tom Razzo coming up as kind of the main convoy people along with Tamara, when that doesn't kind of make sense when you remember back to how the convoy actually was playing out in real time.
Well, there's facts and there's perception. So there's a couple of things we have to unpack there. So you got to the point of what we're talking about, the difference between having standing and being a witness. When you have standing, you're there every day, or you have a lawyer representing you there every day. So you'll see a couple groups. You'll see the Democracy Fund jointly with the JCCF has 1 or 2 lawyers representing them. So they have the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses. And the convoy group, if we can call it that, of the corporation and a few other individuals, they have lawyers there representing them, and they can cross-examine. But you're right, Ben Dichter didn't have standing, and there's others, right? Like Bridget Belton. I don't believe Bridget was included in the convoy group with standing. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
No.
Pat King and a couple of the witnesses near the end that got physically attacked or interactions with police at the end. They didn't have standing. So only a few of those witnesses were there just as witnesses, and they did not have the opportunity to cross-examine other witnesses, but they had to face cross-examination. And in Ben's case, he was one of the few that was kind of surrounded, because he wasn't a member of any of the parties that had standing. And he got tough questions from all sides. He got tough questions from the Neighborhood Association, from the Government of Canada, from the Convoy Group. And we weren't getting an easy pass by anybody, which made the 2 hours that we stretched it into 3 quite challenging. And
my favorite part was when he was asked about the memes. Is here's a page that's clearly labeled humor, and explain these jokes. That was my favorite part of all of it. You do that. So just so everyone was like, Ben Dichter was the one who was probably most vocal, was on Fox News, was going around doing different interviews. And, he was the one who ran those press conferences where it was just for alternative media. He made Glenn McGregor throw a hissy fit, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Now, what really frustrates me, and one of the lies that frustrates me, because I think what the government did, especially on the bank accounts and freezing bank accounts and taking people's money away from this, crossed a big line. And Ben Dichter is one of the main reasons. The Bitcoin community did a lot, but got the most money that got into the hands of the truckers was because of the fundraising through Bitcoin that Dichter set up or helped facilitate. And over $800,000 of money got into the hands of the truckers. They were people filmed it, but we decided not to release any films because the government's so vicious in tracking everyone down that I don't want video out there of a trucker getting a wallet so they can go find him, and Paul Champ can sue him for $1 trillion for second-degree honking or whatever it is. But $800,000 got to the truckers because of that Bitcoin fundraiser. That's the most money that got to the truckers. The other 400,000 was seized by the government when the police raided someone who had the majority of the keys. There was 5 different keys or seed phrases that you need to open up the Bitcoin wallet. Ben had one of them, but 3 of them were actually held by this guy, Caribou Nick, or they put his name in the thing. And I know this because I talked to him, Nick as well, and the police got him. So the 400,000 is in escrow. And Ben had to give up his keys later and gave his keys to Keith Wilson and JCF and his underling. And in testimony, Keith Wilson fans the flame of this nonsense of where Ben stole the crypto and he ran away and he's got all this money.
He didn't say that. He didn't say that. So
he didn't say it. Yeah,
no,
he didn't say it, but he fanned the flame.
Let's back it up. Ben didn't start the Bitcoin fundraiser.
He didn't. No,
it was started by Caribou Nick.
Yeah.
And somehow at some point he had one of the pass keys or the pass phrases. And it needed 3 to get access. And all of those pass keys were submitted into the court as part of the escrow. So that and all the money that was raised, and this is important. So it's good that you guys are doing this, because a lot of the donors, I've run into donors that say, what happened to all that money? And it's not being reported enough. And you're right. It was initially the bank accounts and the Stripe accounts were frozen because of the Attorney General getting a restraining order. And then in terms of the class action proceeding where I'm representing Ben and Chris, there were subsequent escrow orders where that all went into a court-approved accountant, including the Bitcoin. And there was, it was unfortunate because Ben's got a book, honkingforfreedom.com, and it's written positive stuff about the convoy for the most part. And he was going into the testimony thinking he was just going to share his factual experiences and, clear the record. For example, he was the spokesperson for the corporation, but somehow during his testimony, he was getting labeled as the spokesperson for all the protesters, which I don't think anyone can say they were speaking on behalf of all the protesters. But what happened the day before that you're talking about is in the testimony of Ben's former lawyer, Keith Wilson, there are a couple of unfortunate things that came up. And near the end of Keith's testimony, it was stated that there was a deal and they were going to move the trucks out with the city. And it was one tweet that Ben sent out that ruined the whole thing. And the thing that was inconsistent about what Keith said was that that Ben knew there was some kind of a deal, and he tweeted out there wasn't anyway. And the next day, we can get into the details, we were able to prove that, in fact, what they told Ben on the day after, on the February 14th, was that there was no deal. And then Tamara backed Ben up by saying he was given access to her Twitter account because he's great at social media, and Ben didn't know that they were going off to discuss anything with the city. And the other thing that you raised, the Bitcoin, right? So I think it was the written testimony that was provided. Did he bring it up in the oral as well, Daniel, in his oral testimony? But
are you talking?
I do think it's
Keith Wilson. Keith Wilson did sort of a confusing thing where I don't know what happened with that,
right,
even though it was all though it was all like itemized.
So if any other person said that, it could be believable. But because even those following the inquiry, who knows exactly what happened to every dollar or every Bitcoin, right? But it was kind of weird hearing it from Keith because he was representing Ben in the class action when they wrote affidavits representing Caribou Nick and Ben Dichter and most of the defendants, where they submitted into evidence, here's how the money was raised, or the Bitcoin was raised. Here's where some of it went. And here's how it was handed over to what they call the escrow agent, the accounting firm that holds on to it. So then for Keith to go into testimony and say, I don't know what happened to the Bitcoin. I mean, I don't think he would say that in any interview proceeding, because when he's testifying at the inquiry, he's protected. You can't make an allegation against him, but in public, he doesn't have that legal protection of the inquiry. And it's even whether it's true or not that he doesn't know. That's another question. But it's weird because either he was saying something contradictory from what he knew, or he didn't know the facts of his own client that he was representing in the class action proceeding, in which the lawyers he was working with submitted evidence like that they drafted and had the client sign stating here, or more than one client stating, here's everything we know about the Bitcoin. So yeah, that was kind of throwing Ben under the bus, and it really changed the dynamic as to what had to be addressed in a short time frame the next day. For Ben, he went from thinking he's just going to lay out his experience to now he's on the receiving end of these allegations, not only from Government of Canada or the neighborhood association that are against the protests, not only from those that were part of the protest like Ben, but from his former lawyer. Can you believe that? Like, you hire a lawyer, you never think that you're going to get allegations from your former lawyer. We all know that ethically, when we stop representing someone, unless we're forced to, we just, we don't talk about it.
What I found very funny is when he was being questioned by Brendan Miller, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he was the one who was representing the convoy for the JCCF at when they had standing.
No, Brendan Miller's the lawyer for the corporation, the Freedom Corporation, and the whatever individuals from the Freedom Corporation were included in that standing. So
that's what I meant. He's a JCCF lawyer, but he's only working. He's representing the corporation. He's not representing.
I don't know. I don't think he's a JCCF lawyer. No, Brendan Miller's.
They don't. The JCCF doesn't have lawyers. They contract people.
Yeah, but I don't think that's true that he's contracted by the JCCF on this, because the lawyers for the convoy group are getting funding from the Government of Canada. All the parties that have standing get legal funding. And here's an interesting thing that you guys should know. Any witness or lawyer that goes to testify got funding from the Government of Canada, not for my work, but I got the hotel paid for. I got the transportation paid for, and we got like a little small stipend every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So it's kind of weird. The other thing that came up the next day that you guys remember, it was kind of weird that they were asking some of the witnesses, did you know Derek Sloan was raising money for you guys? And they said, no, we'd never heard of it. So I didn't understand why Derek Sloan was raising money for these witnesses. They didn't ask him to do it. And then what was the money for? Because I had 4 days of hotel stay paid for by the government and the commission, and travel and a food stipend, and all the witnesses and lawyers. So Brendan Miller, I don't believe being paid for by the JCCF unless they have something behind the scenes.
At the very least, I think he might have done work for them in the past, in the sense that he might be someone who's kind of associated with them. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, what the funny thing with the Derek Sloan thing as an aside is that it was all also done through e-transfers. So you couldn't even see how much they were actually raising through that little email initiative they're doing with the Ontario Party and him. But anyways, going back to Brendan Miller, though, and just the questioning of Ben, the funny thing is that all the questions to if you were on the convoy side or if you were on the government side, or like you're some sort of like disgruntled anti-convoy citizen, the questions tended to be fairly consistent. You could kind of predict what they're going to ask. As soon as it came to Ben, it becomes, you hacked into Tamara Litch's account. Oh, and you also are like, you were lying about there being no deal, and you did X, and you weren't supposed to go onto RT unless you got explicit approval from every single board member. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? It just became just a lot of conjecture and yelling like this, like Brendan Miller was trying to generate some good clips against Ben, and that was kind of it. It's almost like it just felt like a reputation assault. It had nothing to do with what the EEA inquiry was actually going to find. It was the whole point.
So in Brendan's defense, he's the lawyer for the convoy group, right?
Yeah.
And his job is to protect his clients, and his clients include in that little grouping like Keith Wilson, right? And Tom Marazzo. So when Ben gets attacked the day before with allegations from his former lawyer, allegations that we've yet to hear Mr. Wilson say in any other forum because he doesn't have the protection of the inquiry, I think successfully, it's up to the viewer to decide, but I think we successfully laid out facts showing exchanges between Wilson and Dichter, Tamara and Dichter, that he didn't know anything about any discussions with the deal. And we also laid out, like Ben in his testimony, laid out the fact that he didn't even think there was a deal because the people talking to the city were Dean French, Tom Marazzo, and those two individuals weren't on the board of directors of the Convoy Corporation. They didn't have the authority to represent. So we did such a good job of basically setting the facts straight and dismissing or shutting down whatever narrative they were trying the day before, that when Brendan Miller comes up as the lawyer for the convoy group, he's going to do aggressive questioning to try to salvage back some of the testimony from the day before. So none of his questions are fact. They're just questions of an aggressive nature to try to get the witness, Ben Dichter, to crack. And he didn't. And you're right. Part of the allegation in the question to see if Ben would say something incorrect or that wasn't factual was you broke into Tamara's bank Twitter password. You knew about the deal. You were upset that there was a board meeting and you voted against the deal and everyone else voted for it. So the facts, though, lay out the following. Tamara went up that day and the next morning and said, Ben was given my Twitter and was told to manage it because he's good at social media. 2, he never heard about any discussions. He never
I
heard
also knew that was true like months ago.
Yeah, so he never heard about any discussions between us and the city. Tamara proved it. The other thing that was able to be refuted, there's no evidence in the inquiry that board of the convoy group ever had a resolution to enter into negotiation with the city. And the other thing, the final thing that we were able to prove was there was no communication emailed to the directors of the board showing that letter that they were planning on sending to the mayor, or the letter from the mayor back to Tamara. They never saw it in an email communication. So Brendan tried his best for his clients. I don't think it really worked.
Here's actually one good point that Pat King made. Like, say what you will about Pat King, and I will say a lot about Pat King, but he actually pointed out that on the letter that they were sort of parading around, waving around like Neville Chamberlain, that there was never a signature or anything that actually proved that Tamara Litch, who was supposed to be sort of the at least the figurehead of the board, she hadn't signed it. She hadn't done anything. Nobody had signed this thing. It was just a piece of paper that looked like a press release saying that there might be a deal, and that was it.
Yeah, and it was funny that Pat King, the guy who gets attacked outside of Ben, I think he probably got discredited the most, right? Like everyone's just dumping on Pat King all the time because of some things he said in the media before that obviously are distasteful and ridiculous and obnoxious, and you could say all kinds of things, all kinds of characteristics. But it was funny or ironic, I don't know what the description is, that he's the one that stated the obvious. When they asked him, was there a deal? He said, I saw a letter, didn't even have her signature on it. So how could the letter be authorized by Tamara or the board when they didn't even sign it? Very, like, you know.
Yeah. So let's go into sort of we've got, you did a very good job on Diverge Media the other day, going to the nitty gritty of the sort of what I say, the deal or no deal. And this is sort of like,
I'll drop that link in the chat for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Deal or no deal is kind of what we're going on here. And so the Freedom Convoy and that, you know, the group, you know, the Brandon Miller group and Keith Wilson and Marazzo, what they are saying is they had a deal with the city, and this deal was going to mitigate pressure and take pressure off of the city and put it right on the politicians. And and this is a reason why we didn't need the EA, because this deal was a sign of good faith and proved that, you know, it was, you know, all was good. But the deal fell apart, and the deal fell apart because Ben Dichter's tweet. And Ben Dichter tweeted, and then he you know, broke into Q Mission Impossible Music, Tamara's account, and then retweeted, and then kaploot. Okay. The counter to that is the deal, one, was never all that great of a deal. It's also not really a deal. It's just, there's no two sides. It's just the trucks move from where they are to a place that, you know, I remember, you know, it was, Ben said in the testimony, Salman Sima, who was a very seasoned protester from Iran and has been part of many political movements, was screaming and warning, saying, don't move the trucks, don't move the trucks. They're going to throw the police in if you do. And I can tell you that for the last week of the convoy, Salman and I would go out at night and do live streams, and Salman would come to me and be like, Daniel, you see where the police are there? They're going to move pylons there, there, and there. They're going to move this truck there. And like everything he said about the police are going to do is right. So you should listen to Salman in a protest is a lesson there. Then you have the fact that there's a text messages between Keith and Ben. The deal was what on they claim is on the 13th, right? Keith on the 13th says the deal's going very poorly. On the 14th, he says neither Ava nor I have drafted anything. So he absolutely confirms there is nothing there, right? What they showed in the commission, their evidence was just here's an outline to be reviewed later, which was never reviewed later. So you have this situation where that's the two things where, like, you know, you have one side saying this deal was going to be great, but Ben tweeted and it all blew up. That's why the EA was called. And then you have Ben's side was saying, well, actually moving the trucks and moving around and straight capitulating actually exacerbated the police action on the Emergencies Act because it made the protesters less safe and it made everyone confused and riled up and felt betrayed. There's another very interesting fact here, and we have to talk about, so who's involved in this deal? You know, you got Dean French, Keith Wilson, and Tom Marazzo negotiated. But according to Tom Marazzo, right after the convoy on the Andrew Lawton show, he says the deal's actually instigated by Randy Hillier. So he, according to Tom Marazzo,
or at least he came up with it and started telling people that it would be a good idea. It was
one of the people. Yeah, one of the people.
He said one of the people, but he said the first person to call him about this was Randy Hillier to sort of instigate this, right? But then Tom Marazzo on Andrew Lawton doesn't say anything about Ben tweeting. He said they were on the 5-yard line is his line, and then it all fell apart. So that was the Tom Marazzo narrative right after, 8 months ago, right after the convoy. This is Randy Hillier instigated, it fell apart, and then when it became public, Randy Hillier led the charge to call everyone a traitor and rile everyone up at this fake deal. So this is another interesting thing. So you have this situation where it's actually a bunch of political operatives who are connected to the government instigating a deal with the government. So you have the government negotiating with the government on behalf of the protesters. And no wonder this thing, you know, blew up in everyone's face. But I think it's a good, because I mean, you're not Doug Ford's favorite person. We'll say that. And you probably have spent some time at Queen's Park and going over this. So just what's it like for you to look through this and see, okay, the involvement of essentially Doug Ford's former chief of staff instigate, you know, negotiating a deal on behalf of the protesters? Like how does someone square this circle?
So the facts are really clear. So you got to start from the starting point, though, which is, I think, what Ben was alluding to. I can't remember if he got it on the record, but Ben was basically saying, like, why would the city or the chief of police at the time, Slowly, believe that Dean French or Tom Marazzo were representing even the corporation, right? Because they're not one of the 7 original directors or members of the Freedom Corporation, which is what we're calling it that, but it's got a longer name. So that's the first thing. Like, why would they think, oh yeah, these guys represent the protesters? Number 2, it's hard to believe that the corporation even represents all the protesters, right? So even if the city or the mayor or the chief of police can negotiate or come to some arrangement, capitulation or deal, whatever you want to call it, with these individuals, can they go back and sell it? They can't, because no one's going to look at Dean French. He's publicly in the Toronto Sun saying, I don't agree with this protest. He's the chief of staff and a good friend of Doug Ford's for 35 years. Doug Ford, who's put in the most draconian mandates and lockdowns in North America over the course of COVID-19. So any protester on the ground that sees Doug Ford's buddy Dean French and some guy, Tom Marazzo, who got us in trouble at a press conference on February 8th for suggesting that we were, trying to overthrow the government. Do they speak for me? No. And so that's like that. You start there, right? Like, why would the government believe that these people speak for the protesters? And then you're right. You get into the weeds and you look at the evidence that was presented at the inquiry. And the only people that went to that meeting with the city, Chris Barber was at the meeting. And you remember news articles were released where Chris Barber is a friend of former Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall, right? And Brad Wall was telling Chris Barber over texts that were released in the inquiry, was it the inquiry or one of the litigation proceedings? It's time for you guys to leave, Brad Wall was saying, right? So you got Chris Barber, Doug Ford's 35-year friend, Dean French, and Doug Ford was publicly saying it's time for you guys to leave, joined by Tom Marazzo, who later would become a candidate of Derek Sloan's for a party just entirely set up to just, compete with and slow down the New Blue Party. And Tom Marazzo, a proud member of the Conservative Party of Canada. And the Conservative Party of Canada leaders at the time, Candice Bergen, was saying it's time for the protesters to go home. So I don't know. Do I got to spell it out for everyone? Like, I'm connecting the dots here. The people that got together that said they're going to go on behalf of the protesters to meet with the city and meet with the chief of police to say we're exiting, had close relationships or long relationships with the people from government that were saying this protest has to end and it's time for everyone to go home. And despite the fact that Tom, maybe Randy told him you should go meet with the city, maybe not. I don't know, because it's hard to know what's consistent that comes out of Tom's mouth. But all we know is that Randy Hillary used the opportunity, like a great provocateur, to send a powder keg into the protest, as Chief Slowly called the entire protest. And he said, what'd he say? They sold out, or they're abandoning the truckers. That's what he said. Yeah. He said abandoning the truckers, and he sent out that tweet. And Ben testified that he got attacked online, and a lot of people's, and that would have created a lot of instability on the ground. And I think anyone that thought through it logically would have told people in that position trying to secretly go off and negotiating a retreat, like Ben said to Keith, don't do it. And he was right, because a day or two later, they called the Emergency Act and they started, aggressively cleaning people out. The proper course, I think what Ben said, and upon reflection, kind of like you were suggesting, Daniel, was if you want to do that, if you're running out of fuel and people are getting cold, if you don't have funds to help people go home, is you start internally among the protesters. If you're worried about their health and safety, you internally start telling them, I think it's time we start leaving because the government's getting aggressive. You start there. You don't start with secret meetings, not without the protesters knowing that if it gets leaked, it could create chaos. It's amazing in retrospect that it didn't, right? Like, it didn't create a lot of violent interaction between the protesters when you think about it.
Well, here's the thing too with the actual deal taking place. Like, so everyone just so we can keep restating it for people. That the thing is that Keith, when Ben tweeted out on Tamara's account and his own account that there was no deal, that was literally what Keith was telling him in text messages.
Well, that's Ben's testimony. He said Keith told him on the phone. We don't have proof of that, but he said Keith told him on the phone.
Well, we also, I believe you went on Diverge Media, and on Diverge Media, you guys were going through text where he's saying, yeah, the deal's not going well, it's shaky. So all the text leading up to that.
The very morning after, on the 14th, bright and early, 8 in the morning, both Tamara and Keith texted Ben and texted the whole chat group that they had for some of them, saying there was no deal, more rumors. And the language suggested that it was rumors that were going on for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, but there was another text message that I found that didn't make sense to me at all. If you are actively trying to represent the truckers' best interests when you're engaging in these deals, because I remember at some point, Keith texted Ben or someone that based on what they were doing and what they were negotiating, that Trudeau's going to be pissed, which doesn't make any sense to me if what you're doing is just moving trucks. I don't see why that's going to tick off Justin Trudeau if you're moving trucks out of town.
That's frustrated me the entire time is when they say we move trucks out of residential neighborhoods. It's Tom Razzo's line. They were never in residential neighborhoods. Like there were never trucks in residential neighborhoods. There were a few trucks that you could say were in commercial neighborhoods. Like they were outside shops in like downtown Ottawa. And they moved. But again, like it didn't matter that they were in those commercial neighborhoods because the government had shut down all of those neighborhoods and all those businesses indefinitely. And then, the trucker convoy came to town and then they, threw more threats at the businesses to keep them closed. So these trucks were never really in, to classify everything that is not like right in front of Parliament as residential areas is just not true.
I don't have the facts, and I don't know if there's a map available on the inquiry that shows where all the trucks were parked, but that's an interesting point that you're bringing up. But if you go full circle on the narrative, back to the beginning of what you're talking with the inquiry, it was disappointing for me. And it, is the lesson, everybody. When you hear something like an inquiry happening, check the website right away and look for deadlines, because it was disappointing that Ben and Chris couldn't get standing because they applied late to get standing. Because you're right. Like, let's go back to the beginning. For January and February and March, what we heard from individuals out of the protest was it was legal. Come to Ottawa. We're not doing anything illegal. It's peaceful. But then when we were watching the testimony the day before Ben testified, we were seeing this narrative come out of only those witnesses that were part of the convoy group that has standing. And I think Chris Barber, Keith Wilson, Tom Marazzo, they all testified that basically the narrative was the same. They couldn't influence different groups. It was getting chaotic as time went on, a point that Ben disputed in his testimony. And you're right, Daniel, they were kind of like laying the narrative that they knew they had to leave and they went off to do the secret deal to leave, and it fell apart. Either they said because they couldn't move any trucks, that was Chris Barber's testimony, or in Keith's testimony because of this tweet. And it was frustrating because where did this narrative come from? Because everyone from Ezra Levant to True North to all the talking heads were all saying it was a peaceful protest with bouncy castles. So who told the lawyers of the convoy group that the narrative was now this, that it was chaotic, that there were fringe elements, that we had to exit? And then, even more importantly, because we didn't have standing, I would have loved to have asked the question of those pushing that narrative. For example, do you guys remember when that injunction on the horns came out? And there were articles that were released? And Keith Wilson,
like on the 9th or the 4th or something like that?
Yeah. So Keith Wilson's opinion that he put on the public record as a lawyer was that the judge in that honking injunction said that the protest was legal. And he encouraged people to come to Ottawa. And he kept pointing to this injunction decision by the judge in the class proceeding saying that the protest is legal. But now it comes out that at the same time he was publicly saying that, behind the scenes, he was encouraging Dean French and Tom Marazzo to cut a deal with the city to move trucks out, and they had lost control and it was chaotic and kind of justifying the Emergency Act. So why was a lawyer, Keith Wilson, publicly telling people this was legal, come to Ottawa. And who told other lawyers to show up on the ground of the protest? Because I've got, not part of the inquiry, but I've got clients that have told me that they met a couple of lawyers on the ground in Ottawa and other organizers saying it's legal, keep coming, keep staying, there's nothing they could do, it's legal. And now we've got people across Canada with criminal charges, in addition to the group that's got this class action proceeding. And they're turning around and they're saying, but I thought a judge said this was legal. Because I heard a lawyer on True North or on some news article or on a video they put up saying it's legal. People are getting hurt, right? Like
and that's to say that's not to say it was illegal, but the whole point is people are going into courtrooms just saying this judge said it was legal, and that's not what they said. They didn't say it was illegal. Yeah, they never said it was illegal, but when you walk into a courtroom trying to point to a decision where that decision was never stated, it messes you over in court, and now you're buried in even more costs because you're way down the rabbit hole.
I'm sure some of those people that got sued or are facing criminal charges would have done it a little differently, or maybe wouldn't have done the same things or stayed if they had heard someone say, no, actually, there's been no decision on whether this is legal or not. And there's some things that could be illegal, and there's things that may be legal, but we don't know right now. So why was Keith Wilson doing that? Why was he publicly saying this is a legal protest and a judge said it's legal when the judge never said that? And at the same time,
and then switches when he's under oath in the convoy in the inquiry to say, well, this was actually illegal.
But no, he didn't switch. He didn't switch because he was publicly telling people it's legal, but it's revealed at the inquiry that privately he was negotiating with the city for an exit. So he didn't switch. He was just doing two contradictory things at the same time.
And he's saying it's getting chaotic and whatnot, and people are getting rowdy, and all these sort of fringe groups are coming in. And the funny thing is, in Ben's testimony, I think that this was kind of telling, and the video was released to prove that this happened, that Ben said the first time he ever met Keith and was told that this is the lawyer representing us was when Keith and some of the other lawyers had put out this video, which Ben called it the War of the Worlds video, where it went against him and Tamara's messaging, Ben and Tamara's messaging, that this is all peace and love, and we're showing up being united against these bad laws and whatnot, and we're going to sit and protest until the government actually engages with us and tries to get rid of these discriminatory laws. And then then Keith Wilson and his kind of group come out with this, you got to come to Ottawa. This is the last chance for your freedoms. You got to get down here. And it's very dark and gritty kind of video. And it's like, well, he can't blame other people for a chaotic situation, sort of these nebulous forces of chaos coming into the Freedom Convoy, while he's putting out messaging that effectively kind of encourages this chaotic mindset in terms of you got to get there right now. It's fully legal. Do whatever you want. Get over here like today. Of course, but now he's the guy who is just the peace and love person, and it was Benjamin that was potentially. Yeah,
and we don't know which narrative. We don't know which narrative Tamara agrees with, because of course she's got criminal charges pending, and thanks to the JCCF event, she got arrested again, and she's unable to speak, right? Like, we don't know which narrative she would have supported. Was it Keith? And it was just Keith Wilson in that video that Ben was referring to. Was it the Keith Wilson message of this is the end of, I don't know what he was saying, come to Ottawa, or was it Ben's message? And I think the important thing here, though, is the messaging doesn't always line up with what people are doing behind the scenes. And it's easy to get fooled on Twitter or independent outlets, right? It's easy, right? It's so easy. And if we're going to be like conservatives and criticize the CBC for not giving the facts, criticize mainstream media like CTV not giving the facts, then shouldn't we hold the same standard of independent outlets like the Rebel and True North, repeatedly stating that Tom Marazzo was a big leader and a big organizer of the convoy? But then when Tom goes under testimony and he's summoned, he says, well, I played a small role, really, really small. I was just there for logistics, which is he did his best Neville Chamberlain interpretation. He went to the city. He said, I'm going to roll the trucks up. Very small, but independent outlets want the whole world to know that Tom Marazzo was a key player. Maybe he was, and his testimony wasn't correct, or maybe the Rebel and True North have to do a better job of identifying what was going on and not just feeding everyone who's frustrated with fake news more fake news. The other thing that really I'm struggling with it's really bugging me, right? Politically, when we started the New Blue Party, Ezra Levant interviewed us, me and Belinda, and he said, I agree. Good for you guys. Good for you guys doing the New Blue. Good for you. The PC party is way too far left. But then by the time the election came around, I think Ezra didn't interview me once in the whole rate. In fact, Ezra hasn't interviewed me since before I got diagnosed with a tumor, since the federal leadership that Daniel talked was fine. It's his program. He doesn't have to interview me. But I think someone told me on the night of the election results that he called me a vote splitter, right? So he changed his mind from a year later, from starting the New Blue, he said a great idea, to the end, it was a vote splitting idea. That's fine. That's politics, right? Like, I don't know where Ezra stands on anything and who he wants to push. All that is going to hurt is the unfortunate Ontario voter and me at the ballot box and my candidates. But it's a little different when you're Ben Dichter and the day after Tamara gets arrested, okay? Stay with me on this one. The road captains came in and they all said, people are getting hurt. We have to leave. And they all agreed to leave. And Ben responsibly puts on Twitter, I think, that it's time to leave because people are getting hurt, to encourage people not to get trampled on. And he gets attacked by Ezra Levant. And he gets attacked by Mark Friesen, right? That Ben somehow sold out, okay? Because he was trying to tell people the police are trampling on us because they expected him with a broken foot to go out there and suffer the freezing cold. That's fine, right? That's fine. So now they're putting a target on Ben's back. But now, when the inquiry reveals that, in fact, Tom Marazzo and Keith Wilson were off trying to broker the exit strategy and the let's get out of here strategy, where are the criticisms from Mark Friesen and the PPC and Ezra Levant? Why no criticisms?
So here's another thing. What
great leaders they were. At the very least, I want to thank Sheila Gunreed for letting me and Ben go on to straighten the record out on that one because we didn't get an opportunity for quite a while.
So, yeah, I mean, just to straighten this all out and on this point, I've been very clear on my position on the convoy. I think it was great. I think it was necessary. I don't think the honking was torturing anyone or whatever. It died down. You could sleep at night. I was downtown. And, was it slightly annoying to some Ottawa residents during the day sometimes? Yeah. But freedoms were being stolen. So I think it was totally justified and the most successful and best movement in Canadian history, in my opinion. And no one should be arrested. No one should have been put in jail. What's done to Tamara is obscene. And a lot of alternative media benefited from the convoy hugely, very bigly, as the former president would say. And a large part of that was because Ben, the spokesperson, proved the point that you could keep mainstream media out and you can still get messages to millions and millions of people purely through alternative media streams, through True North, Rebel, National Telegraph, Post Millennial, Diverge, like all these different places. They can carry the message and people will come if it's interesting enough. And as the media hat, I think into that. What people don't know and what about some of these places is on the Rebel thing. I mean, this is so after the first press conference, Alexandra from the Rebel had missed the first press conference. She missed it, right? Where all the alternative media was there and they did 2.5 hours, whatever.
Alexandra's the lady who got shot later with the
smoke, and she did a great job.
She's great. Yeah,
she did a great job. She got shot in the leg by a gas canister by the Trudeau government. Filming and documenting how insane the invocation of the A is. So Alexandra had called up Ben and said, "Oh, sorry, I missed it." And what Ben and Tamara did is they stayed extra and they gave the first ever exclusive interview with Ben and Tamara for the Freedom Convoy, unedited, pure. This is our intentions. The first one to do. Alexandra got it. They took back, translated to French. Ezra spiked the story. The first ever.
You don't know he spiked it. You just know they never aired it.
Okay, they never aired it. Well, what else?
Effectively spiking.
It's fair, right?
Okay, so yeah, I
they sometimes show clips of the video they've never actually put out. Every once in a while, you see it.
Yeah, but it's like, okay, this is like where it's like, okay, so now it's like, okay, when it comes to the convoy thing, it's like, is the Rebel and is because Alexandra, it wasn't her thing, but there's some decision making at the Rebel said we have the initial exclusive interview. The first one with Ben and Tamara, they've given it to us first, and there was a decision to not air it. And that to me says everything I need to know about where they stand on
And the other, but speaking of media, can I tell you the other one that I thought was really interesting? Because I was there the first weekend, right? You guys remember the New Blue team got the speaker and the mics, and we put it on the flatbread. And our Rob Stocky, our candidate in the Ottawa area, he worked tirelessly to set it up because nothing was set up, and many people spoke on the mic on that first day. And then on the Monday or the Tuesday, our team had to go back, and I was just fresh off chemo and antibiotics. I was surprised that I lasted that long in the cold in a crowd for the whole weekend, but it was time to go back. And then on February 8th, a few days later, they had that press conference with Tom Marazzo. So for the whole 2 weeks of the protests and leading into it, all you saw from the mainstream media was terrible articles about Tamara and Ben and Chris Barber, anyone. They would dig up stuff from their social media and say, this guy said this and this lady said that, and she's on the Maverick and she was Wexing.
The mayor tried to physically separate all of Canada, pick it up and smash it.
She did it by herself. It was terrible. They didn't have anything nice or neutral to say about anyone. But then on February 8th, when Tom Marazzo comes up speaking on behalf of the protesters, and he says, we want to sit down and said some words that he regretted later, and the media spun it as used that opportunity to say they were calling for an overthrow of the government. I saw articles, CTV News, I think a Toronto Star article, and I'm always suspicious when it's a Toronto Star article because they got contacts in the Liberals and they got a nice little deal from the PCs to get gambling money, and a local paper, and it was all flattering, or at least neutral. This guy, Tom Marazzo, former military, was instructor at a college, and he's now the spokesperson. And I started scratching my head on February 8th. I was, nothing bad to say about Tom Marazzo from the mainstream media. This guy must have an immaculate record, right? Nothing. It was just introduced. Here he is. It makes you wonder, right? It makes you wonder, why did this guy get flattering articles from the mainstream media? And why does he keep getting pushed by the independent journalists who criticize the fake news mainstream media as some kind of spokesperson when he had small role? Small, really, really small.
And and the thing is too that people just seem to just go with it in the sense that it seems like because certain factions within the Freedom Convoy, they'll kind of get the most people on their side in terms of they've anointed different people as leaders, that they're the real faction. I think that's what a lot of people are kind of doing with Ben. They're almost sandbagging him and trying to make it seem like, well, it's just Ben and two other guys. It's just Ben and Chris Guerra. Well, who cares? It's just two people, and they must be in the wrong because they're the minority of the group.
Karahalios also the original. So it's fascinating who doesn't get called as witnesses in this. So your other client, Chris Guerra, was the Adopt a Trucker guy. So I don't remember how much money Adopt a Trucker got and was handling, but Chris Guerra, and I've seen the text messages, was the first guy on the ground. He was there a week before coordinating with the police on where to park the trucks. So the Convoy Commission doesn't want to hear from the guy who is coordinating with the police for days before the convoy and setting up the convoy logistically on the ground. It was Chris Guerra.
Well, I don't think he was setting it up all by himself, but
he's laying it out. It's outlining how we're going to do this.
Okay, no one did it all by themselves, of course, but this is someone who was
talking to police. He was talking to police.
He was in communication with police on the ground, and a major figure in this, right? So it's not. No one. Listen, with the convoy, I've been clear. No one set everything up. There were dozens of different convoys. This I see as sort of this was an inspiring movement, right? The reason why the convoy was so big, the reason why it got $20 million is not because of Ben, not because of Tamara, not because of Tom Marazzo, not because of Keith Wilson, not because of me or you or whatever. It's people had enough. Everyone knew what the government was doing was wrong. It was time to end the mandates. It was time to get rid of the vaccine passports. It was time to scrap ArriveCan. They had gone too far. It was not going to end. And people's lives were being destroyed because of this. And people saw that this was an opportunity to do something about it. And good people, everyday people said, I'm going to march. I'm going to either drive my truck or I'm going to meet a trucker on an overpass. I'm going to stand in the cold for 8 hours so I can wave at these people. And that's kind of, what happened. But so you had Chris Guerra on the ground communicating with the police, head of Adopt a Trucker. We don't want to hear from him in the inquiry. And Chad Eros, who was the original, the accountant, right, handling the funds for the Freedom Corporation. part of the original board and handling the funds, and we're hearing, and we're just not interested in their testimonies.
Well, okay, so let's not. I don't think it's fair to throw attacks at the commission. Here's why.
All right.
You're right. There's 7 original directors of that corporation, and only 3 were summoned: Chris Barber, Tamara, and Ben. And another 5, Chad Eros, Chris Guerra, Miranda, Joe. Who am I missing? No, 4.
Sean Thiessen, right? Yeah.
Oh, no,
Was
they're
Bridget Belton?
So 3 were summoned and 4 were not. Bridget was not part of the corporation.
Got it.
Now, in the commission's defense, right, you're the commissioner and you got a team of lawyers and you're trying to get to the facts, right? Where do most people that weren't involved, either on the ground or talking to the people behind the scenes, where do they get their information from? They get their information from media, right? So if the media is going to feed whatever narrative they're going to feed because of whatever operatives politically want to push a certain narrative, they're going to ask to testify, like the guy Tomarazzo, who they've been told over and over again was a spokesperson, and who Derek Sloan says key logistical organizer, and who Liberty Coalition says is a big deal or whatever. They're not going to call Daniel Bordman or Jim Karahalios or Wyatt and say, Tomarazzo, what was his role? They're not. They're going to look at the media, and that's how damaging the mainstream media can be when they just push one aspect. And I think Ben did a pretty good job in a short amount of time to say, why is Jeremy McKenzie being summoned here? Why is Pat King when he wasn't a director? Those are the 2 that I remember that got summoned to testify that really outside of the beginning in January, maybe they didn't have as much. So maybe Chris Guerra, he was involved in the beginning talking to the police, but then he handed over logistics stuff on the ground, helping people out to a couple other individuals. Maybe they didn't need to hear from him, but it's interesting. You're right. The witnesses tended to skew towards those who got the most media coverage.
Yeah.
And maybe this would be a really good time for us to transition to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is Doug Ford, who is also not somehow testifying in this. Because I think, again, I'm with you, Jim. I'm never going to blame the commission for what they're doing. I think they're also calling people based on who they think they can get to show up without having everyone else start filing stuff about how I'm not going to show up anymore and I'm going to see if I can get my way out of this. So I think they're kind of trying to be diplomatic with who shows up, who speaks.
Yeah, but I don't think they don't really care whether you'll show up or not, because you get summoned. Like, you don't go. You're in contempt of court. So they don't really care whether it's convenient or not. Like, it wasn't convenient.
But more so, they don't want a Justin Trudeau to try and file something to say, I shouldn't have this talk. It should be someone else from the
I don't know.
PMO.
They summoned Doug Ford, and they knew there was a threat that he would say no, right?
Oh, but he did get out of it. That's more my point. I'm wondering if they started inviting certain people, they would say, I don't want to be in this anymore. Or if you don't get Jeremy McKenzie to speak for no reason, then I'm not going to testify, because I at least want him to lay the groundwork for that.
In the interactions with the commission lawyers, you don't get to influence who goes to testify, because there were witnesses that wanted to testify, people who were applying and pushing to testify. And if the commission doesn't think you're going to contribute an alternative, like not alternative, but more facts, or say something that hasn't already been said, they won't call you. And they're operating on a really strict timeline, right? Like 4 or 5 weeks, and they got to fit everyone in. But unfortunately, like everybody, they get influenced by media reports. So if the media says that certain people were prominent, they're going to get summoned. We were lucky that Ben got summoned, because at least can you imagine if he didn't get summoned and he got attacked with allegations like that the day before, and there's nothing you could do about it? You can't sue for defamation because the person's protected in an inquiry. Thank goodness he got summoned. It's such a shame to be attacked in an inquiry by someone the whole country's watching, and it's on the record for historically forever, if you don't have the opportunity to rebut yourself. And the media wasn't giving Ben, despite the fact, let me just say this, despite the fact that he had the opportunity to speak as a witness, and it's going to be on the record now on Canadian history, his rebuttal to the allegations and Tamara backing him up, he still got negatively impacted. He was still prejudiced. Let me explain to you why. If you look at the National Post YouTube channel, if you look at any of the other mainstream media outlets, terrible, they'll have videos of all the witnesses that testified. And I saw the National Post and YouTube channel skipped over Ben as if he wasn't even there. So even though he got the chance to testify as a witness, he's negatively impacted because everyone's carrying Keith Wilson's testimony, but not everyone's carrying Ben's. So
and the funny thing is that Ben's was actually kind of the more interesting stuff. It was the stuff where you saw kind of the fights between him and Brendan Miller. There was actually something being discussed of substance, but they don't want that part in it because it kind of draws between the binary narrative that either
in my view,
completely illegal or it got a little out of hand, where Ben was not saying that.
So I'll just say this from my opinion, being on the convoy, seeing the ground. Like, the reason why I think the media is not putting Ben Dichter's testimony thing is Ben's 3 hours is the most vociferous defense of the convoy as a concept. And like, this is why I hate the sort of like you and Ben are being divisive narrative. Like, what you're doing is you're defending the convoy from all sides.
I haven't heard that. Who's saying that?
I mean, I see it from, there's the internet comments. There's, I think did Tom Marazzo and Keith Wilson kind of.
I had one president of a riding association in New Blue quit because despite the fact that, his buddy Tom Marazzo would attack me over and over for a year, that was okay. Yeah. But the minute I did my job and helped a client and a friend who's been there for me defend himself, that president quit. And the New Blue team just did this exhale and said, thank goodness, because we couldn't take any more of that. But other than that, and other than Tom, I haven't heard anyone say we're being divisive, but you're right. There's like a handful of who the people say we're being divisive are the ones that actually inject the division. And when you try to defend yourself, they scream, that's divisive. That's divisive. But keep going, Daniel. Yeah, like what keep going on the divisive part. I couldn't
what I'm saying is you're not you're coming after. Now you're attacking Jim Karahalios coming after. No, I'm saying is
being divisive on Daniel. Yeah,
you're being divisive on Daniel. You're off the program. Wyatt, boot him. No, I'm just saying is like, and that's the frustrating thing is like, what I saw there is like the only like true 100% of defense of the convoy, and the only one who went out with the opinion that like the convoy, the Freedom Convoy, the protesters. The organization, none of it was illegal. All of it was fine. There was no reason to call the emergencies. It wasn't that, like, it wasn't the, things are getting out of hand, but we think the Emergencies Act was just a bit too far. It was, there was no justification, period. Things were fine. Like, the only narrative that, like, no, the movement was fine, totally. There was nothing wrong with the movement. That was Ben's testimony. So this is, again, we get into the weeds. Can
I just make a comment about that?
Yeah.
The other reason that I've learned why you get shut out of media stories is because there's two tribes politically in Canada. There's the Liberal tribe, and you might as well lump the NDP and the Green Party in the Liberal tribe because the way it looks, basically, the Liberal Party controls the Green Party anyway. So they
say crazy things to normalize them for the Liberals to sort of meet them in the center.
So there's that tribe,
and
then there's the PC tribe. Right? Broadly speaking. And if the media relies on stories based on their friends that are in the back operating in those two parties. And when I mean party, I don't mean like the chief of staff to the premier. Could be a consultant or a lobbyist working behind one of those two parties. If you don't fit in the narrative of one of those two parties, the media is unlikely to follow you. Let me give you an example. After the election that I was in, we finished 5th. The National Post ran a story and they asked us for comment and they conveniently forgot that we responded and wrote a story about how the 6th place Ontario party is going to stick around. They put a nice big picture of Derek Sloan and, sorry, missed you. Yeah, you did say you're available for an interview, but I forgot you responded. That happens to us all the time because we're not plugged in to the mainstream media and a lot of the independents. So when you're up there and you're Ben Dichter and you're not fitting into the Liberal narrative of the Emergency Act was necessary, and you're not fitting into the narrative of the convoy organizers, which is, well, we tried to retreat and it was chaotic and we couldn't do anything. So we did our best to go cut a deal and it went sideways because of one tweet. And, and the people pushing that narrative are Chris Barber, who's friends with Brad Wall, Dean French, Keith Wilson, who's friends with Dean French, Doug Ford's buddy, and Tom Marazzo, who's got it nice and cozy with some conservative MPs because they bring him into a meeting. Remember with James Topp? Who'd they let in the meeting room with James Topp? Tom Marazzo, right? He's obviously got a nice cozy relationship with conservative MPs. They can get the platform of the National Post and the independent outlets, because they're all connected to the conservative and the liberal parties. When you're not connected, like Ben Dichter, and you've been left out to dry, you have to go and defend yourself, and you got to hire a good lawyer, and you got to get on the independent outlets like Diverge Media and the National Telegraph and get the word out yourself. And luckily, Ben's got a book, honkingforfreedom.com, and he's doing it. But that's the tragedy here. It's one thing to get shut out of the media for votes, but when people are getting criminal charges against them, when people are facing multi-million dollar lawsuits and civil procedures and they can't get the word out, that's a tragedy. And that's really unfortunate. And that's when people start getting hurt. You're picking your eyeball there as I'm talking. I'm sorry if I'm boring you.
No, I got it. It just I got some itchy.
You're so annoyed. You're scratching your eye.
Yeah, so it's a sign that I know that Jim's part of the deep state or the deep province. Get him.
Yeah.
So on the media, because I think so outside of all of this, like you make a good point of the media, because the case for the Emergencies Act was created by the media, and slowly but surely we've learned that everything the media put out there that justified the Emergencies Act was wrong. Right? There's the justification that, the protesters were burning down buildings. Fake news. That was some purple-haired guy, and that was clearly an inside job that went nowhere.
Yeah.
Arson hoax.
All the anti-hate network stories about how they're spreading anti-Semitic stuff. There's all the people going and attacking homeless shelters. There's every like a few hours you'd be like, a truck ran through a building or something like never happened.
The foreign funding lie, the foreign funding stuff. Yes, the majority of it was Canadian funded. So all this stuff, right? The guns at the Clouds border blockade actually weren't at the blockade; they were away from them. So all the stuff the media then used to justify the Emergency Act end up being lies. These lies were repeated by MPs in Parliament. Not true. We will throw in the obviously ridiculous Diagolon, which was, I don't like Jeremy McKenzie. Jeremy McKenzie doesn't like me. There are reasons to hate Jeremy McKenzie, but like to claim that Diagolon, which is a fictional country where I believe a toy goat who's traveling through time and addicted to drugs is the vice president, that clearly wasn't a real thing, and not a justification for the Emergency Act. So you had, and what I don't see talked about enough at this commission is a catastrophic failure of intelligence from the media, where the media would say something, the government would then source the media to say these things, then the media will retract these claims.
There's actually been some great testimony from certain police officers. Like there was the superintendent of the OPP intelligence, and he even said that if any of these media organizations who keep coming out with these stories about how there's violence occurring, or about all the chaos, or about all of the potential of violence or weapons, if they have any information that I haven't seen, I'd love to see it, but I have no clue what they're talking about. Those were honestly, after week one, there was pretty much no justification, because all the people at the top of the RCMP and the OPP said there was literally not a shred of evidence that this thing was ever going to turn violent. But then when you go to Peter Slowly and Steve Bell, who need to protect their jobs or try and get new jobs, then it's a tinderbox, and then they can't actually present you any information. They're just saying, well, there was phantom violence out there. I remember Steve Bell even said there was a feeling of violence in the air or something like that. It was that ridiculous, where they're just saying that there's this miasming, abstract violence from championing freedom. And not to mention something, I just want to mention something recent. It's insane how another justification was, well, there's Nazis and Confederates in the crowd, because there was 2 flags spotted the entire freedom convoy. Yet, teacher unions can protest outside of Queen's Park with communist flags, socialist flags, and advertising Marxist.ca. And who cares? There could be literally dozens of them, and those are okay ideologies.
Yeah, logic is not a good thing if you're looking at politics or trying to get media stories out, because they don't tend to report logic, right? They'll report stuff if you misspeak or say something that they can categorize as crazy. But if you say anything logical, and case in point is because of the media reports, the inquiry spends all this time at the beginning of all the witnesses, the witnesses that were participating in the protest. If you notice, in every witness, they spent the first 5-10 minutes, right in the beginning, they try to get the background of the individual, and then they focus on their other political beliefs and the other political beliefs of other witnesses. And they always ask the question, do you believe that Tamara or whoever, were motivated by other political beliefs for this protest. Like, who came up with this? Like, the idea that it's a protest for Western separatism or it's a protest on anything else. That was all fueled by the media, quoting people out of the blue. But when they bring Dean French back on the CBC to talk about his negotiation on behalf of the truckers, how come they don't say, Dean French got caught with patronage appointments and not being honest about what he was doing as the chief of staff? And they don't frame that, well, maybe Dean French was being dishonest because he was dishonest before. Maybe he was dishonest when he said he was trying to negotiate a deal. They never do that. If you're against the media narrative, they'll pinpoint past contradictory statements to try to spin a story.
It legitimately is like
they'll never do that. They'll never dig up the old stuff, the old quotes about
it's almost like the way that that Twitter verification used to work. That Dean French is a verified media user. So if you ask him a question, his answer is substantial, but you're one of the unverified people out there. We don't even need to include you in on the story. It doesn't matter because you're not one of the special people that's supposed to be listened to.
Yeah, the media.
And that's why Doug Ford doesn't have to talk in the testimony, and no one's going to question that.
And it's getting bad with the independents too, right? Like, I've seen articles. Roman Baber was one of the first to speak out against COVID lockdowns and mandates, because as soon as he became a candidate for conservative leader and the insiders at the Conservative Party gave him the green light and said you could run for leader, now he's back in the club, in the tribe, right? So they spin these stories out and they let him write op-eds. But Belinda, like way before any politician, my wife Belinda, stood up.
I'll say it so you don't have to
like
say it for your wife.
In.
Belinda Karahalios was the first one to come out against all of this, and the only one to actually vote against the Bill 195, which
months before all the rest of them, months.
Like by far, like definitive first one in Canada, most outspoken and consistent on literally every issue, like every cultural issue you care about. First, not a photo finish, let's say, right? Not just lockdowns.
It wasn't like 5 minutes apart, months apart.
Yeah. Like
Baber was the next
critical race
year.
theory, like all of these things. But she didn't do the thing that certain other people did, is just like when they oppose it, like go crazy and take it to ridiculous extremes and start drawing like
no. What she needed to do is go cut a deal with the tribe of the Conservative Party, say I'll run for leader and I'll play nice and I'll run to lose and I won't challenge, I won't ever try to win. I'll just sit here and play nice, and then she'll get the flattering articles, right? And so I guess thank you for bringing this up, because now we've shifted gears from legal stuff to political stuff. Because like you're saying, Daniel, sometimes you get messages and emails from people, and you got to get out there, you got to get the word out about the New Blue or about the truth at the inquiry. Boy, the media and the independents do an excellent job of shutting out the truth. We can hire half a dozen media relations people at the New Blue, and they can be on the phone with reporters all day long. And if you've got a story that doesn't fit in the narrative that their masters are spinning and is the truth, they'll just bury it. They won't even repeat it. That's how bad the mainstream media and the independents have become.
The thing is that this is the thing I always have with independent media, is people have to realize there's legacy media, there's alternative media, and then there's independent media. It is insane. I don't want to be like, oh, name this place and this is what they get. But there's a lot of independent media organizations out there who are heavily funded by political insiders. They know what to say on certain issues and what not to say on certain issues, or they're going to get their funding cut. There's a reason why certain people are interviewed constantly on their shows, and you'll see the video and there's 2 views on it because no one cared. But the whole point is that they paid enough money to get on there.
I spent after the last election and the run up to the municipals, this guy from CBC, Jonathan Montpetit. Have you guys heard of that name?
No,
anyway,
he sounds like a CBC.
He writes some articles. He reached out for an interview, like a podcast interview. And I guess he's used to people right of center saying no to the CBC. I don't care. I'm pretty comfortable in what I'm going to say. And if they're going to attack me, I mean, at this point, 3 lawsuits later.
You've paid enough money to be able to go onto the CBC. I think we've all paid enough money.
I'm quite comfortable. They've tried to destroy me and my wife and my family. There's not really much left that they could say about me that'll rattle me. I don't want to, count it too early, but So I did it, a 1 hour with the CBC. Never saw the light of day. A 1 hour like this, he didn't mention me in an article. He never quoted me, nothing, because he was asking a bunch of questions and it didn't fit into the narrative. The narrative he wanted to spin was that the New Blue Party only got 127,000 votes because of COVID, lockdowns, and mandates. And it was fueled by some of these fringe elements that you're talking about. And I was like, no, actually, we've been at this since Axe the carbon tax, since fighting voter fraud internally that's been verified by police. We were the first on the carbon tax, the first on the voter fraud stuff, the first on MPs and MPPs speaking their mind in the last decade.
The first on anti-CRT stuff.
Right. Critical race theory, Belinda voted against. And he was looking at me at the end of it and he was like, oh, okay. Like it didn't fit in the narrative he wanted. So he just, that interview never existed. It's like a comic book. What do they do in the comic books? They just rewrite it. Like it's from an alternate
Retcon.
Yeah, retcon. That's the word. I forgot my comic book days. They just retconned it.
You just lost the nerd vote, Jim. Come on.
I'm trying for every vote, guys. So help me out here. But yeah, they just like it didn't exist. It didn't exist. That's the media. And it's unfortunate when I see True North and the Rebel doing the same thing.
It was the stupid horse race stuff between New Blue and Ontario Party. Well, which one should someone vote for? And it was like one party was started like 2 seconds ago. It's just made of the shell of an older party. The Ontario Party, that's what it was. They didn't have EDAs barely anywhere. They were just like came out of nowhere, didn't have a platform. Their own person who, Rick Nichols, who became an Ontario Party MP, literally voted in favor of critical race theory in schools. And then there's like the New Blue Party that has like EDAs everywhere. And then there was still this like, well, which one's going to succeed at the end of the day? I'm like, I feel like there should have been more criticism of the Ontario Party, but it was only criticism of New Blue. And then it was talking up Ontario Party as if it was an up and comer.
Look, that's the advantage when you're connected with the establishment of the Conservatives, right? Liberty Coalition and PAIF, these are all groups well connected to the Conservative establishment. Like Tanya Granick-Allen's husband is the chair of the JCCF. It's no coincidence.
He's now the only board member too.
It's no coincidence that they're going after, a Ben Dichter on the stand, the lawyers that were used to represent him. It's no coincidence that Tom Marazzo is an Ontario Party candidate and he's on cozy terms with them. It's no coincidence that those groups never talked about Belinda, never did an email blast flattering or complimenting Belinda, always backhanded swipes. The Liberty Coalition, they reached out to Belinda before any politician would speak to them about lockdowns and mandates. She was the only one to go to a meeting. She voted against it. She went to another meeting. They never, ever, ever said a nice thing about her ever. And all of that is because they're all connected to the Conservative establishment. You want to hear the straight line to it is Dean French, Doug Ford's buddy, Brad Wall, former Premier of Saskatchewan, and the other one that we haven't talked about, the News Forum, that other channel that no one really watches?
Yeah.
Tony Clement's one of the people on that, right? They were one of the early sponsors of the Liberty Coalition. And Tony Clement now is on the chair of the Conservative Fund, the top dog in charge of fundraising, all connected with the people we're talking about here. And when you're going against the tribal grain, if we can call it that, and trying to get the truth out in the facts, and it goes against whatever they're spinning, they're not going to cover you, or worse, they're going to try to.
I mean, I'll just
why?
say I'm dealing with some flack because of Tony Clement right now. I'm quite involved in the Iranian Revolution, and I'm very pro people, anti Islamic Republic. Tony Clement just put an article out in the National Post advocating for talking to the MEK, which is like an Islamo-communist quasi terrorist group.
I'll have to read it.
Yeah, it's insane. Like they were part of the Khomeiniist group. They were two parts of the Islamic Revolution. Their faction broke off. Khomeini gained power. Like they're no different. They sided with Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, massacred some villages. Like it's a crazy group that. And Tony Clement just put an article saying, "Yeah, we need to do them because they're a democracy." And it's like,
which only would undermine only undermines the Iranian movement, because then there's an actual boogeyman for the regime to pretend that they're up against.
And he's and this is so I mean,
let's not go down the rabbit hole too much.
As soon as I see someone back the MEK, I go, okay, I don't trust this person on anything. So
Anyways,
that's
but
my
back to
political
socially
lens.
conservative organizations. The thing is, people have to ask themselves after a while, after that socially conservative organization has failed to get anything substantial done for 30 years, eventually shouldn't the media stop taking them seriously? Eventually, should they stop getting pumped up every once in a while? And shouldn't you stop listening to the candidates and to the new parties that they promote? They seem like they're paid losers because for some reason, it doesn't matter how many times that they fail, they somehow get $100,000 the next year to do it all over again.
Well, they're socially conservative groups second, right? The first thing that they are is extensions of the establishment, right? Like that's what they are. So their goal, a lot of these groups, is to keep people interested in the established parties and make sure that they stay involved in leadership, nomination races, so on and so forth. So, you know, if you look at it from that perspective, it all makes sense, right? If you try to analyze it from Wyatt's perspective, which is logical, like you're a social conservative group, you're PAFE, you're a group advocating for parents, you're Liberty Coalition, you're advocating for Christian values, then, if you want to win, how would you do it? Then it doesn't make sense. Then Wyatt's right. It's like, wow, these guys keep losing. If you think about it and you think, oh, these guys, this group is not leading with their values first, they're actually operatives, then it all makes sense why they push certain people and they don't push others, why they always, you know, they fight and then just when they get to the, as Tom Marazzo says, the 5-yard line, they say that's enough, let's not go for the win. And the media is never gonna change because they're just influenced by whatever the lobbyists in the back tell them what to do. It's our job to keep fighting and pushing, because more and more people are asking the question that Wyatt's saying, how come we always lose? And how come things get shut out by the media and some other voices that we depend on?
And the funny thing is, every time the socially conservative factions lose, they always have this, well, let's all just come home at the end of the day. Guys, we all got to come home to Aaron O'Toole. Guys, we got to come home to this person. Doesn't matter if we didn't get anything at the AGM. Doesn't matter if the party told us that we're all disgusting troglodytes and that we should never be let back in. Guys, we got to have that come home moment every single year after we lose something else.
And it's not just a social conservative group like Canadian Taxpayers Federation. They write great op-eds, right? Like they wrote an op-ed about against the per vote subsidy that Doug Ford brought back, and
I would say it's
other bills. And when Belinda finally did great speeches in the legislature against them, never heard a peep from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. When I was doing Axe the Carbon Tax, they did mention Axe the Carbon Tax. And the Toronto Star wrote an article about me beating the PCs in court. But the difference was back then, most of the PC establishment was against Patrick Brown, and they didn't want him as leader. So they were happy to push Axe the Carbon Tax out. As soon as I ran for party president against Brian Patterson, they were like, no, we can't cover this guy in any positive light ever again. So the truth is
it's not SoCons that lose. I think it's heterodox conservatives. It's outside the box.
No, that's a big word.
That was just an example I was using. There's all kinds of groups. The gun groups also never get what they want. They never got what they want from Aaron O'Toole, and they told me I was a hack for not liking Aaron O'Toole after I said they're literally not giving you a single thing.
I remember this.
What's heterodox? What's heterodox?
Different way of thinking, so outside the box thinking. So I think a good example of this problem of sticking to the media, and especially the conservatives, is it's a long-term losing strategy for our side. It's not even a good strategy. It's very short-sighted. And Doug Ford is the greatest example of this, right? Doug Ford took a pounding from Justin Trudeau in the 2019 election, so much that Andrew Scheer was so afraid to talk to him. But then he buddied up, did everything Trudeau wanted, locked everyone down, went far left, spent more than Kathleen Wynne somehow, and buddy in the media. And Trudeau defended him. But when it came time to throw him under the bus, as you see in this QP thing, and the thing, well, all of a sudden the Liberals are now out there bashing Doug Ford because now it's convenient. So, he built up all this goodwill and social capital among the Toronto Star by giving them all that money. He basically saved the Toronto Star by giving him a gambling license, right? He was Justin Trudeau's biggest supporter for lockdowns and mandates. But all of a sudden, the lunatic unions, and I do mean, like, I have been physically assaulted by badge-wearing QP members for trying to cover the Al-Quds Day rally and trying to ask people questions why they're, like, literally waving the Hezbollah flag, a terrorist organization, saying great stuff, and been pushed by QP people, like, no comment. So I don't love this organization. Now, the members themselves, I have respect for. But here we have...
They're forced to be part of the union, so it's not their fault.
You have these far left unions waving communist flags versus Doug Ford, and then boom, like all this support and goodwill he built with the media, well, all of a sudden it goes out the window. So,
and the funny thing is that Doug Ford has another 4 years of majority government. He could just say, you know what, I'm not going to cave to these people, and I'm just going to stick to the road I'm on. Except he caves within a week to not protests that aren't even all that big. They're radical, but they're not all that big. But he finds out that he's in Justin Trudeau's bad books now, and then he's trying to figure out how he can legitimately execute himself on camera for Justin Trudeau's approval. Like I'll give QP their 11.7% raises. I'll do whatever they want. Suddenly, like when both him and Trudeau would never have given anything to the truckers. They'll do it for the people asking for crazy raises, but they will not do it for the people just asking for basic freedoms, because Doug Ford knows where his bread's buttered now that Stephen Del Duca tanked the Liberals and the PCs in Ontario have effectively become the new provincial Liberals.
Well, you gave him the benefit of the doubt there. You said a week. He didn't last a week. I think it was 48 hours, right? Like he said, he passed that law. They went on strike against the law, which
I think it was about 51 hours for campaign.
Was it?
I'm saying that because
You're
it lasted from
underselling.
Friday to Monday. That's technically 1 week to the next in my mind.
Yeah, bold leadership. I mean, and the other thing that was funny, I thought about it after, and I put a tweet out, and I got attacked from some of the union leaders. Was, wow, someone just dropped a bomb in the chat there that we may have to discuss on another chat, because that's a whole other losing legal cases on purpose. But that's a whole other one.
The point is they don't win any.
Doug Ford passes a law saying it's illegal for those unions to go on strike. They go on strike anyway. So isn't that by definition illegal, the strike? Like if there's a law that says you can't go on strike and they go on strike, that's illegal, right? And then they force the government to change a law by going on that protest strike. Isn't that like an insurrection? Isn't that what they were calling the protests in Ottawa?
January 6 times 20.
These protesters are illegally protesting and they're forcing a change in law. I didn't hear anyone say CUPE was insurrecting the government. We don't even need an election. Anything to do with labor. We just should create a law and say CUPE picks. We don't need an election on it. It doesn't matter, because CUPE will just pick.
That's how municipal elections pretty much go at this point.
Yeah. The CUPE leaders are in charge. And it's amazing. The one good thing for Doug Ford with the CUPE stuff was he totally changed the channel from not testifying at the inquiry. He totally changed the channel from going to court, spending taxpayer money not to testify. What was he hiding? All that stuff. He totally changed the channel. Some would suggest maybe he did that whole CUPE battle for 2 days on purpose to change the channel, because he didn't want everyone talking about the inquiry and how bad it was. Even Anthony Furey, who's usually not that critical of him, was criticizing him for hiding from the inquiry. And he totally caved. And it's funny because all they tell us in the establishment PC party is if we play nice with labor, we won't have any labor wars. And there were all these articles about Monty McNaughton, who once ran for leader against the sex ed curriculum and against the carbon tax and against wind turbines. Does that sound familiar, guys? Where did you get those ideas when you ran for leader? That's interesting. Wow. Okay. Sorry, I got.
You probably can't say the person's name.
How this guy Monty McNaughton, I think Martin Reg Khan was ready to start. Wow, how Monty has matured as labor minister now. He's made peace with the unions, and there's not going to be any fighting with the. And then all of a sudden, boom! The first time they try to oppose the unions, they all turn on them. It doesn't matter how far left the PCs go. They will never get on the same page. It's not called a good relationship with the unions. It's capitulation. It's totally caving and capitulation. That's what they've done. They're even farther left than the Liberals were, because I think the Liberals forced the CUPE or the labor unions to go to court against them.
Yeah.
They capitulate. That's what they did. They capitulated. And that's exactly what Tom Marazzo and Dean French did for the truckers. going to meet with the mayor at the protest in Ottawa, capitulation.
Yeah, it's like
the establishment playbook.
Yeah, like I hate calling this a deal. I hate calling this whole thing deal or no deal. Even though I did say deal or no deal, because there's no deal. There's not, the city was giving nothing in return. Like I remember when there was like talks of like, oh, potentially moving trucks. Like I had suggested to some common people, like, what are you asking for? Like, oh, you're not asking for anything? Like, and that was driving some people crazy. It's like, well, like I said, like, if you're going to talk to the city, like at least try and leverage, say, if we're going to move trucks or we're going to do this, then you have to let the Ottawa businesses open, right?
Or look, even at the basic stuff like that, if you want a peaceful exit, your first thing, if you go into any negotiation or discussion, is to tell people on the ground. And the second thing is to tell the other side, if we do this, you have to give us time to move people out peacefully. And you please make sure that you don't trample on them. Yeah. And they went in discussions, and 2 days later, everyone started getting railroaded. And like the other thing, the big thing that we're missing here in the inquiry is that Ben Dichter was able to address was no one from the Premier's office or the Prime Minister's office even bothered trying to get a peaceful exit. And they're trying to justify the Emergency Act. Like, I know, like, there's a bunch of legal steps before the Emergency Act, and everyone wants to have these debates now. What legal tools were available to the province and the federal government to clear out the protest? Okay, we don't even need to get legal. Like Daniel said, let's not talk legal for a minute. How about picking up the phone and making a phone call? How about, hi, can you guys leave? How about that? That wasn't allowed, apparently. But for CUPE, oh, boy, we phone and we do press conferences. We do all we can.
Literally just 2 days ago, we even had the
as Wyatt says, no flag stories. We got flag of communism, Cuba,
the Tigray
Palestine,
People's Liberation Art. There's literally the Tigray People's Liberation flag at the QP rallies. Tigray, this region in Ethiopia, where the Communist Party rules it, and because they were kicked out of the federal ruling coalition, they started killing people. So you can fly that flag, and people like high five you. And even the ATU union, like the Amalgamated Transportation Union in Ontario, they literally were protesting on Hudson's Bay and Queen Street 2 days ago, and they were blocking handy buses. They were blocking train lines. They were blocking like actual arteries of the city that people need to drive down. And like, there's no horses showing up to, run them over. Yet like you like occupy the roads around Parliament that no one really needs to go by unless you want to park right next to Parliament to, like, I don't know, fulfill some sort of like lifelong bucket list item. That you don't need to go anywhere near Parliament in a normal day in Ottawa. Yet the ATU can just do whatever they want. They can block whatever they want, and the media will never touch that story. They'll say what their demands are. They'll never say what their tactics were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yep. This is the clear double standard. And like, let's also not forget the time. Remember when the Emergencies Act was called? And then there was literally eco-radicals on the other side of the country who violently attacked an LNG pipeline project, lit
axes,
trucks on fire with people in them, and attacked people with weapons. And we just, no one, like, none of them have been found. We just did, like, it was martial law. So all the apparatuses of the security state were available to use. You have literal violent attacks against a critical infrastructure project, and
they've never said anything like this required the Emergency Act, right? Like a protest, and they didn't even pick up the phone to say. Hey.
Even Doug Ford is texting Justin Trudeau or emailing him and saying, "Oh yeah, we don't need any increased police powers," and then Doug Ford calls an emergency, and then Justin Trudeau calls an emergency, which is probably the real reason why Doug Ford doesn't want to testify, because his emergencies declaration 48 hours before Justin Trudeau's gives Justin Trudeau the perfect justification at the EA to say, well, Doug Ford did it 2 days ago. He must know something.
And the other thing that's coming out this week, right, with the witnesses, or that came out last week, sorry, we're already into the weekend here, and I'm spending my Saturday night with you guys, right? This is important stuff. Yeah. The other thing that came out,
I feel bad for you.
They didn't need the Emergency Act for any of the other protests, the 2 protests across the country. It was just for Ottawa, right? Like, they were able to, I think that's what I remember seeing in the testimony, was the government said for the bridge, the Ambassador Bridge, they didn't need the Emergency Act. Right. And they only needed it for the one street in Ottawa where there wasn't like a big economic hit, because trade, if that's impacted, sure, you could see how that's critical to the economy of Canada. But on Wellington Street, I don't think there's a lot of trade going back and forth outside of
It's
local.
a very foot traffic based street too. It's not like there's a TTC line that runs through there, some sort of like C train that you can't get on board and can't cross through. It's mostly an area where people leave their apartments, which are kind of up in the upper ends of buildings. They come down, then they go to their jobs at Parliament or somewhere nearby. No one lives down there who needs to drive through that area.
And it's a shame that we didn't get standing so that we could ask some simple questions at that inquiry, which is, how come no one ever phoned to try to, negotiate or talk about a peaceful resolution? The province, the federal government. What's one thing that's becoming like really obvious? You're going to get the diehards that say, those protesters, just run them over with whatever you need, throw them all in jail. But what's becoming really obvious to everyone else is the Emergency Act and all that stuff was political messaging. And increasingly, people are starting to realize something doesn't smell right. And with the facts and the way they're being spun at the inquiry and coming out. And there's thousands of pages and hours and hours and hours of testimony. Guys, you should go and start writing books, because the stuff that's getting revealed there is never going to get revealed by the Global News, CTV News, Toronto Star, National Post. Even True North and Rebel doesn't have time to dig up all the stuff that's being revealed at the inquiry. Vince is asking good questions about lawsuits. I am afraid to comment anymore on this stuff, because when Roman Baber launched his lawsuit, I wrote one email blast and I said, Roman Baber should have known when he launched his lawsuit against, he launched it. Remember, guys, that lawsuit Roman did, and it was just on a narrow part of the COVID mandates. It was just about gathering in places of worship.
Yeah.
And he lost because the judge said you don't have standing as a plaintiff because you don't attend synagogue.
Yeah.
And standing is like the basic question when you file a lawsuit. Make sure that the person you're representing has the right to bring this lawsuit. His case, he was raising money and getting emails, didn't even get heard on its merits because he didn't have standing. That's the same thing that happened to Peckford's case. It's
the same thing that happened with Danielle Smith's case. She even had a case in Alberta where she was raising money to make medical supplies more available. She was like suing to get a vaccine made more available, which is weird because I'm not sure if you're allowed to sue on that front, that the government's not providing enough of a service. But yeah, she raised $100,000 and that one never went forward.
So I don't know anything about that one, but I know.
Sorry, I'm from Alberta. I'm just ranting about stuff.
We all know that you just got a problem with Danielle Smith, but she keeps outplaying you because she's saying all the right things. She's socially liberal, but on the COVID stuff, she's saying the right things. So we'll see.
I give her that she says the right things.
We'll see when Wyatt. We'll see when and if Wyatt's right on that one. But I'm afraid to say anything about the Peckford trial because again, on that one, they didn't even debate. The judge didn't even have to make a decision on the merits because he said the mandates don't exist anymore. And it's kind of well known in the legal industry that you can't sue for something that hasn't happened or happened in the past that doesn't exist anymore, because judges don't want to corner themselves, because if the mandates come back and someone else brings a lawsuit, they want to be able to look at it again. They don't want to set the precedent, and you got to see the facts. So look, if I say anything more, people are going to say I'm being divisive and I'm not being nice, and we've all got to be united. So look, the truth has limits, guys. The truth has limits in politics. Not everyone wants to hear the truth. So I think we should wrap it up now before people start attacking me. And we should wrap it up on Tom Marazzo is a key figure in the logistics of the convoy protest. He was key to the whole thing. He probably put the whole thing together with Keith Wilson and Dean French. It was all them. It wasn't Tamara. It wasn't Ben Dichter. It was all them. We'll take them at the word of the True North and Derek Sloan and Ezra Levant. And the other thing I want to say is I don't need donations for going to the inquiry and spending 4 and 5 days, 4 nights away from my family, because the government of Canada paid for 4 nights in my hotel. They gave me a stipend for food, and they paid for my kilometers and gas. Oh, I haven't submitted that expense receipt.
They haven't.
So you won't see any new blue emails for donations to Ben or Jim. As for why Derek Sloan is raising that money for witnesses who don't even want him to do it, and where that money's going when they're paid their whole stay, I don't know. You'll have to ask Derek Sloan. But I'm not saying anything because I don't want to be divisive.
Okay, we'll ask Derek Sloan.
For the sake of not being divisive, I'm going to bed now. and we're going
Okay.
to sign off and say goodnight.
Well, thank you for coming.
Unity.
Unity. Thanks. Well, tell Belinda we say hi, and thanks for
Speaking of
spending Saturday
Unity,
night.
we didn't play the Tom Marazzo Unity message on Canada Day weekend to the.
Oh yeah, where he tells people to check their
It's on the
egos and to
TNT
shut
YouTube
up.
channel.
Is it?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it? Yeah, for the sake of unity, what did he say again? If you can all just be quiet so I get something through your thick heads.
He threw a temper tantrum, and it was so much worse in person than it comes off on video, and it doesn't come off well in video. You're going to start me on a Tom Marazzo rabbit hole.
Well,
Unity, for the sake of unity, good night. Good night. For the sake of unity.
We'll definitely have you back on to talk about more provincial stuff, Jim.
We will unite with Dean French and shake hands, and all will be forgiven.
All right, so next week it'll be Jim Karahalios, Dean French, Doug Ford,
Absolutely,
Andrew Horvath,
absolutely,
and Stephen Del Duca.
Ready? We'll just unite everybody.
A round table, because there's
no divisiveness. There will be one party in Canada, and it will be the Liberal Party, and we'll all just agree.
We'll all unite, and we'll beat Benjamin Dictor to death, because that's the person we're all allowed to hate.
We will
never. That stream will be powered by wind energy.
Yes, and we'll be unity.
Okay. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you back at the next TNT Live that will happen at some point. I'll try and figure out. Our schedules are crazy, but have a great night.